Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Woojin Shen. I'm a partner at the law firm of Nelson Mullins in Washington, D.C. My legal practice focuses on manufacturing industries and related U.S. federal and state policies, and I will be your moderator for the session on the critical mineral supply chain issues. As we open our discussion today, it's important to recognize the critical role that certain minerals, such as lithium, cobalt, nickel, and rare earth elements play in the global economy. These minerals are essential components in the production of clean energy technologies, especially vehicle EV batteries and automotive catalysts, which are vital for the transition to a more sustainable future. But they're also key to national security, as the industries they support transportation, energy, and defense are critical to the stability and competitiveness of nations. As nations increasingly accept electrification and digital technologies, the demand for these critical minerals has skyrocketed, creating vulnerabilities in the supply chain. Many of these minerals are concentrated in a few countries, especially with China currently dominating the rare earth processing sector, which poses a significant geopolitical risks to many countries, including South Korea. The competition for these resources is not just economic, it's really strategic. So in today's session, we'll explore these interrelated themes, the challenges we face in securing reliable critical mineral supply chain, and the efforts being made to address the challenges. By addressing these topics, we hope to uncover ways to strengthen global cooperation and enhance supply chain resilience in this critical sector. So before we begin our discussion, I'd like to first introduce our panelists to the audience. So sitting right next to me, Mr. Robbie Diamond, who is the founder and CEO of SAFE, a do tank rather than a think tank based in Washington, D.C. SAFE is a very well-known organization in the energy space globally, and it supports energy security and resilience of the U.S. and its allies, such as South Korea. Next to Mr. Diamond is Dr. Wouter Gut, who is the Vice President of Government Affairs at Umicore, a multinational materials technology company based in Brussels, Belgium. He holds a PhD in environmental engineering, and since 2022, he has been serving the company as the Government Affairs Department head at Umicore. And the last person sitting in the row is Mr. Jin-Dong Kim, who is the Director General of the Bilateral Economic Affairs at the Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs. His responsibilities include administering the Korean government's role as the chair of the Mineral Security Partnership that we'll be talking about in this session later. So let's start the discussion with the challenges that we face, these geopolitical challenges. So Robbie, let's talk about China. The big elephant in the room. So China dominates rare earth processing, which creates significant risks for supply chain of critical minerals to a lot of countries, including U.S. and South Korea. How do U.S.-China relations affect global efforts to secure alternative sources of these minerals? And what is the U.S. doing to mitigate dependence in China? And do you think the U.S. will eventually be successful in mitigating these risks?
Well, I'm glad that we can solve this problem in 50 minutes.
Cool,
but first of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's great to be in South Korea. This country is just so pivotal to solving this problem. This country has the economic heft, the industrial capacity, the boldness, and I think the risk-taking to move forward where many other countries in the West have given up that willingness. So it's an exciting to be here to be talking about this. And really, as you said, the elephant in the room is China. And really, for people who don't know, as you said, there's rare earths and there's critical materials. As we go from a fossil-based world to a minerals-based world, both our energy systems and also our military systems are going to require lots and lots of minerals in everything we do. And China has come to dominate that space through foresight. Again, they were very smart about it. In many cases, the Western world, Europe, the United States decided to offshore their industrial capacity since China joined the WTO in 2001. And so they produce or process between 75% to 100% of all the critical materials that we need. So not only do they do that, in some cases where we mine things or we process things, we then send it to China. So rare earths, for example, that are mined in the United States, right now there are no processing facilities. They send them to China, and then they come back to the United States, and you see that over and over again. So it is a big problem. I want to say, but it's a bigger problem than just where the materials are from, like where the rock is mined, and then where it is processed. That companies around the world, as we continue to try to build these supply chains, in the United States they created an IRA where they're spending hundreds of billions to trillions of dollars to do this, but in many cases they're having problems. One reason is because they've forgotten how to do this, and so that's very hard. Two is they don't have vertically integrated supply chains. That makes it hard. But the real problem is that there's overcapacity, that China really does control that supply chain, and their ability to drop the price in different ways, taking private sector companies all over the world who make these investments and then very quickly see that they are no longer economic. I just want to give one quick example of that. I'll call it nickel, the nickel story. So, you hear, minerals, and then people, that they just hear the broad category. So I'm going to pick one mineral. And this all happened in the last 6 months. So nickel, and, hats off to China. They spent Indonesia creates a law that says that you can't export the nickel, the raw nickel, to go be processed in China. So China goes and spends hundreds of billions of dollars to go step into Indonesia. But we did not in some of the Western worlds. In fact, we sold some of our facilities. And they worked on something called HPAL, which over the decades, the Western world was unable to figure out. Now, HPAL turned low-grade nickel to high-grade nickel. Now, they did that, though, by burning lots and lots of coal. So if you want to solve the climate issue, they do that by 8 to 12 times the amount of emissions. So this is cheaper, this is dirtier, there's much more tailings, all these things are happening. Well, now Indonesia controls over 50% of the nickel market. They're moving up to over 60%. Behind that is, of course, China's control. All mines in Australia, which are high standard mines, which everyone says they want, have now been closed down. All happened in the last 6 months. And that's happening in each of these categories. So it's not just a question of who has the rocks. It's not just a question of can we build processing facilities. It is a question of how the world economy works and what are those standards and how do we make this happen and are we willing to, how do we compete against, an economy that operates, I think, very differently than our own. And, and then my last comment, I know there are a lot of people here to say a lot of important things, but South Korea, of course, is as I said, really important because of its industrial capacity and what it does and the companies that are here. But also it finds itself, of course, in the middle. Since the IRA was passed in the United States, South Korea is the largest foreign direct investor into the United States of America. At the same time, China is the largest foreign direct investor into South Korea because they are trying to use South Korea to get their products to get the incentives of the IRA because you're a free trade country with the United States. So again, I think it's really one of the most interesting places to be in addressing this question. It's an existential question for the future industry, both from an energy perspective and I think a defense perspective.
Thank you, Robbie, for giving us an overview of the issues and challenges and the status of those challenges. So let me ask you a question in order. While Robbie provided us with an overview of the challenges, can you tell us about specific challenges like industry players face, such as Umicore, in securing critical minerals, and how companies like Umicore, navigate these challenges to ensure stability in the material supply chains for EV batteries, for example, and catalysts?
Yeah,
And
thank you.
Can you also tell about any ESG concerns that?
Sure, I'll connect that and build on what Robbie just shared as introductory remarks. In terms of, we're a global company, in terms of the materials we source, Umicore is a transformer of materials. So what we do is we buy metals containing materials of all kinds. We transform that into products for our customers. Customers are battery manufacturers, are car manufacturers, are electronics companies. So we actually give a functionality to metals to make them work in the products that our customers make. So we're there midstream, sourcing raw materials, transforming them, selling them on to the next step in the supply chain. So we have this view on where the materials go from, but more importantly also, where do they come from? And then we are into this debate on supply chains. There's three things that we look at. It's diversify the sources, it's to build robust supply chains, and it is to close the loop where we can, recycle. And I'll give, for recycling, let me start with that. Not all materials are suitable for recycling. Batteries put on the road today are made to drive cars, not to be recycled, but they'll come available for recycling 10, 15 years or more down the road, but they will be there. Massive amounts of materials that are now functioning in cars, but they will come available for recycling. We do that actually already today for electronic materials that have precious metals inside, gold, silver, palladium, platinum, rhodium, iridium. They can be fully recycled from these materials. Very complex products that are in your smartphone, the electronics, or in your laptops, or for any product that comes into life, we can recycle that. So my point is, closing the loop is a longer-term perspective, but that's where we also need support of governments to set the right policies in place so the materials are available for recycling. Let me come back to sourcing. Diversify sourcing, that sounds like obvious. No one wants to be dependent on one single supplier, but it is not that evident because the materials that we work with, be it platinum group metals, which are concentrated, 80% of the global reserves are in South Africa, be it cobalt, 70% of the reserves are in Congo, be it nickel, so much percent, don't know exactly, in Indonesia, also some in Canada and other regions of the world. But so by definition, having the material so concentrated in certain regions of the world, it's almost unavoidable to work at least for part of your sourcing. But you cannot be dependent on one single source. So diversification is key. And then the robustness of your supply chain really much depends on the partners you work with. And I think that this is something that happens already for a long while, but building partnerships, we'll get to the mineral security partnerships, that's how organizations look at it, but also for companies like us, building partnerships is key. And last point on the ESG, I would say. So what is that? I'll give 3 examples of how, if I can say, Europe is kind of instrumenting what they expect in short and also longer term on ESG. It is things like due diligence. Due diligence is important to certify where your materials come from. Secondly, carbon footprint. What's the carbon footprint of materials? If you drive an electric car, you want it to drive with green electricity, but you also want it to be manufactured with green electricity, so it has low carbon footprint. Robbie gave the example of nickel from Indonesia. It's probably the largest carbon footprint nickel you can get today, but it's massively available because of the investments that are happening there with the technology. But so what Europe does in terms of regulating, and it's important for South Korea, because you have large export markets, not only to Europe, also to US, for instance, and these rules are being set today. So I was in a session this morning on renewable electricity. It's pretty hard these days currently to find renewable electricity available in South Korea. It's very different in the US and in Europe. It's very differently regulated. That's because governments kind of instrumentalized it, provided the means to do so. But my point is on ESG, these rules are actually being implemented. We've only seen the start of it. I think South Korea, and from my conversations with my own company, but with partners in Korea as well, I understand you very much look into how are we going to implement that also in Korea, of course, because you know you won't escape, if I can say so. It will be there and it will have to be implemented. And the third one is transparency, provide transparency, which is something you can do with digital product passports, for instance. Very new, will take years to implement, but it's another tool to provide, let's say, the insights and where the materials come from, what's the carbon footprint, and so on.
Okay. Thank you, Uder, for sharing the challenges that your company faces and what your company is doing to address those challenges. So we just talked about the challenges in the mineral supply chain area. Now I'd like to move our discussion onto the Mineral Security Partnership, or MSP, which is a multilateral organization whose primary goal is to address these challenges. So I'd like to ask this question to you, Jin-dong. What is MSP? I think the audience here may not be familiar with what the MSP is. So who are the participants in that organization? What's the role of the Korean government and the Korea's nation? What are the ultimate goals of this organization? We would like to explore, what the organization is, its goals. So if you could share some ideas and thoughts about the organization with the audience, that'd be great.
Thank you for having me. And Rovi and Wouter already talked about the challenges on the global supply chain of critical minerals. I don't know how many of you have heard about MSP, but MSP is a global partnership that was launched in June 2022 to address these challenges that we have just talked about. There are 15 MSP members. They are Korea, all G7 countries, Australia, India, Estonia, Finland, Norway, Sweden, and European Union. The MSP aims to develop a diverse and sustainable supply chain of critical minerals, ranging from mining and extraction to processing, refining, and recycling. To achieve this goal, MSP engages in 4 main lines of activities. They are information sharing, promoting investment, and then elevating ESG standards, and expanding recycling. And the activities of MSP is not limited to member countries. They are working very closely with the producing countries. To achieve this goal, MSP has created an MSP forum, in which MSP member states and mineral producing countries are working together in areas like information sharing, capacity building, R&D cooperation, and ways to promote local value additions, regulatory cooperation, and policies to foster high ESG standards. And also, MSP is working very hard to get private sectors involved. A good example is organizing MSP finance meeting, which brings together stakeholders from member states and private sectors and financial institutions. I have to say that Rovi's organization, SAFE, is active participants in the MSP finance meeting. The meeting provides opportunities for the participants to share information on co-financing opportunities, challenges, risk mitigation, and best practices for investing in order to help advance MSP objectives. Regarding the Korea's role, Korea has been a member of MSP since its beginning in 2002. And in July this year, Korea took over the role of the chair from the United States for 1 year. As the chair, the focus of Korea will focus on producing tangible results by facilitating progress with current MSP projects, so that minerals mined and refined in the MSP project can enter into global supply chain. We will also continue to look at other opportunities and try to expand the pool of MSP projects, which can lead to a greater productive capacity. We will explore measures to support these projects so that they can come online as quickly as possible. So on the important question of how the MSP contributes to diversifying supply chain and mitigating supply risks for critical minerals. The MSP focuses on increasing investments by facilitating projects across the entire value chain, as I said, mining, processing, and recycling, and provides financial and diplomatic and other forms of support to build stable and sustainable supply chain. What is important in this is market signals and incentives, such as those provided by Inflation Reduction Act in the US, which is essential to encourage private companies to invest more in mineral projects. The MSP partners can also help mitigate risks associated with mineral projects by providing financial support, including loan guarantees and providing debt financing. So through these efforts among MSP partners, the MSP has identified about 30 projects around the world, focusing on critical minerals such as rare earths, lithium, and graphite. For each project, MSP has formed a working group led by one of the member states. For example, Korea is leading a working group for Mahenge graphite projects in Tanzania, and also Korea is participating in a couple of other working groups. So finally, the sustainability is the key aspect of MSP project. MSP has adopted the principles for responsible critical minerals supply chains. With these principles, MSP has committed to support projects that meet high and internationally recognized ESG standards. But as you all know, we know that ESG leads to higher costs. So for our efforts to be successful, we have to make sure that there are markets for high ESG products. This may be achieved by consumers making right choices or appropriate government measures that give advantage to the high ESG products in order to achieve a level playing field. So otherwise, efforts to raise the ESG standards may end up as mere slogans. Let me stop here for you.
Okay, thank you, Jin-dong, for sharing with us about the information on the MSP. But I'd like to ask you about your thoughts on the same organization, especially because of your organization's involvement in the coining the conception.
Right.
I mean the MSP, especially in relation to the U.S. State Department's role.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to be very quick so we can get on to other topics. So yes, our organization, SAFE, is the exclusive NGO partner of the State Department. I think MSP is a really exciting project. In some ways, it was launched before they knew what it would be. But now, finally, it's not a U.S. project. It has a new chair, and that's exciting to see that it will have continuity. And in some ways, I think it started because you would see these projects get picked up by China, where, I think a lot of countries, were not watching, or they couldn't move fast enough to go do what they needed to do. Now, that being said, and our industries, remember, our countries don't really go do that. We don't have companies. Most of our companies, aren't told that you got to go do that. So here was an opportunity. That being said, it's a new world, and they're trying to figure out what to do. And so these high standard projects. What we are, besides just thinking through how to operate, in particular, we're running something called Minvest, which is how do you bring the money to the table to invest in these high standard projects. So, the private equity firms, the big mining companies, the junior miners, the export-import banks, the direct investors. In the end of the day, these countries, they're the State Departments, they're the foreign ministries. They pick a project and, in the end, they don't have money to go build a mine or to go build a processing facility or recycling. So we're trying to help bring the industry to the table in a very neutral way and, crowdsource, hopefully build these up. And I just say one thing about the money. In some cases, it's the money, but in many cases, many of these companies, they just want their governments, and as many governments as possible, to plant a flag in these projects, because some of these places are very risky places to work and to invest in. And so when things go bad, they want to know that the U.S. government will be there, the Korean government will be there, both from a public perspective, but also from a diplomatic perspective. So it's very important that we do this. And as you heard, there's the MSP, there's this Minvest, which is the investment arm, and then there's the MSP Forum, which brings the producers to the table as well. And it's the beginning, but it's a very important initiative to keep going, and I'm excited to work with the Korean government as well.
Thank you, Robbie. I just want to continue the conversation with you, Robbie, but from the more general sense of policy's impact on this issue. So, can you talk more like generally about the impact of U.S. policies on this issue? What I mean by that is the Inflation Reduction Act. So we have been talking about the IRA for years now, but how does this policy impact global supply chain issues, and what are the implications for the automakers and material suppliers, especially at this point of time? And it's been many years since we know what the IRA is. When the act was first introduced, there's a lot of concerns, especially from the Korean companies and Korean government. Now the situation has changed a lot, I think. So what are the impact of those policies or the IRA or any future act or policies of the U.S. government that will be coming? And are there any partners in there like supply under the IRA framework? For example, Australia, right? And what are how are countries like South Korea engaging in partners like Australia under the IRA framework?
Right. So, I mean, on one way, the IRA was a big shock to the world, but in many ways, we know a lot, and we still don't know a lot. And with an election, we also don't know a lot. So, and I think so. This has been a moving target, and in business, the worst thing in the world is to have a moving target. But the United States has put a lot of money on the table, which created a lot of concern in every country in the world. But it wanted to create an allied supply chain, and it preferenced free trade countries, which South Korea was one. Europe was not one. Europe is not, and so Europe and Japan and that in the beginning was like, oh, you get nothing, and South Korea had other issues, with it. But what has happened though is that once they wrote the bill, they had to create like what are the definitions of different parts, like what is the definition of a foreign entity of concern, what is the definition of 45X, the different tax credits. Now a lot of that has been watered down. So Senator Manchin, who wrote the bill, had like a much harsher view of this allied supply chain. And but what's going on in American politics for people who care and why this is a moving target is that not only lobbying from governments but also industry, but inside the White House there's a group of people who are I'd say the climate advocates who want everything now, the cheapest batteries, the most solar panels. They don't want restrictions on supply chains. And then there are people who care about these supply chains, and they know it will take some time and it'll cost a little bit more money from a national security perspective. And so I think that they've had a little bit more success. America is like a tanker. It moves. And so the tanker has moved. It's kind of like slowly moved back. But, ultimately I think the direction is set. And then the election will have, and we'll talk about the election, will have a different impact on it. So I do think it's moving. So what does that mean for Australia and everywhere? Well, from this perspective, South Korea I do think is in what they say in English, the catbird seat, is in the best position. It's in the best position because it's a free trade country. So things that happen here are totally get the tax credits. But it's very open in that you can bring goods from other countries that are not free trade countries as long as you do one piece of the process in a free trade country. Also, the ownership with Chinese companies is probably less harsh than originally conceived, which also has made it easier for the South Korean companies because they'll just change their ownership structures. I personally think that's probably not a good thing, but that's the way it is. So it's a moving target still, even a year and something later. But one other thing it has done is it's everyone says like, oh, this IRA is terrible, and I say, well, make your own IRA. And look, the Europeans are kind of making their own IRA. Now, they don't have the money in the same way, but if you look at what Draghi put out 2 days ago, it's an IRA. He's saying, Europe, we got to get together. We need to create a single market. We need to invest in the same way the Americans have done it. So I think that's good. I think every country in the Western, democratic, whatever you want to call it, world that throws money at this, that crowds out this, the Chinese products will help us all. And so I'm a big supporter of more IRAs and having strong industries in each of these regions. I don't think it's for America to suck up those industries, but each one, because that is what I think will create stable politics, a good middle class, and put us in a good position if there's another pandemic or military war. These are things that are needed.
Or you had some
Can,
comments?
yeah, can I just compliment Robbie's introduction to IRA? And as a company, who has to implement this? Because there's great things happening around us. There's challenges, as we said at the start. But what can we actually do as a company? It's nice to hear there's financing, that governments are proposing things, that there's also ESG included. But what does it mean? Concretely, 2 examples, what Umicore does. In Korea, we partner. I told at the start that one of the things to build global supply chains is to have robust supply chains. It's about partners that you work with. And so we don't necessarily have to do all the transformation activities ourselves. We have know-how in-house. We do R&D. We can help partners to build that into their systems so they can do the investment to actually have the manufacturing installed, and you can bring to the table technology know-how. And concretely how we've done that, and where the US and the EU were actually very supportive, is in the case of germanium. We are one of the largest germanium refiners. Germanium goes to electronics, into optics, into satellite solar cells. It's a critical raw material. And we have a project established now with Gécamines and the DRC, which actually has a big hill of waste from previous mining activities. It's there for 60 years and more. They call it the Big Hill. But the Big Hill has some very low amounts of germanium, but good enough to be recycled. And what Umicore brings to the table is the how to process that and extract those germanium impurities from a big heap of waste. And it's Gécamines who actually does the investment to do the operation. So Umicore, it's a win-win, because Gécamines is able to extract germanium from the Big Hill, and Umicore has diversified the sourcing. And it's an example of recycling also of something that would be considered always waste and would stay there forever. And it's IRA and these kind of rules that actually have stimulated the thinking. Have the US, EU has helped in that case to build the partnerships. And that is what I see happening in Korea as well. It is the implementation of what I said at the start. It is not only ESG, it is also ESG, but rules like the IRA are actually making companies about their supply chains, are helping them to identify the partners, the right partners, so they can comply with these rules. And these rules are not going to go away. They're there to stay or even to be reinforced. So you better organize today for the future, or you may be out in the longer term.
Right. I want to go back to your comments about the IRA, that you said you like the IRA, everyone should have their own IRA, so that makes sense to countries like America, the United States, and a large economy bloc like EU. But how about countries like South Korea, or companies in countries like South Korea? So they have the capabilities, they have technology to sell and develop and sell products, but they do not have a market that is as large as the one owned by the US or the EU. So even if the Korean government tries to develop its own version of the IRA, some people think that the impact of the Korean version of the IRA would not be as significant as the American version or the European version. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I am not saying that every region of the world should be able to do everything. That's a misnomer. And I think that's where the partnership comes in, right? America might duplicate more than most because of its size and because it's military and it just is what it is. Let's say, but what they should do, I'm going to use an analogy about this war in the Ukraine and NATO. So what we've seen, if you watch the news, is they get together at NATO and they sort of say okay, you'll send these tanks and you'll send these planes and you'll send these, these missiles, and there's a discussion of who does what. That is what should happen with these supply chains. Right now, everyone's just throwing everything against the wall, and no one really knows what they're doing. That is where we are. So let's be clear. America has no clue what it's doing. There's we have a chart that shows every agency that does something, and there's hundreds. It's totally confusing. So we are at the beginning. As I said, this is at the beginning. But so I'm not saying that you need an IRA that does everything. What you need is every country should be investing. Now, what we should have though is that the standards that that these countries are doing should be similar. We'll get to the last question, which we might not get to some of the middle questions of what we should do. That should be very similar, so that we are sharing and we're not undermining. We need a race to the top, not undermining each other to race to the bottom. That is what I mean by our own IRA.
Okay. So, partnership, and everyone
And
should have a role.
investment in our industries, and
Yeah.
one might invest in this industry when the other says, okay, I'll invest in this industry, and we trust each other.
Okay. We have less than 4 minutes left, so before we close our discussion, I would like to ask you a question about the future. So what the government entities or the industry players could do more to further develop partnerships and create more capacity to supply these critical minerals in different regions? Can each of you make a quick comment on that question?
My quick comment is, as you heard before, we need transparent supply chains so people know where it's coming from the mine to the final product. They need to be embedded with our standards, not every country having the same ones, but a minimum standard, right? And they have to have border enforcement. And then, yes, we will all pay more, and every one of these governments has to agree, tell their citizens it will cost a little more, but we will save our industrial base. That is Korea, that is Japan, that is the United States, that is Canada, that is Europe, and that is Australia. That is the way to save our industrial bases from overcapacity and undermining.
Okay, Water?
Yeah, I'll continue. As a company who has to implement, and I agree with Robbie on the standards, the cost is one thing we did not really address, but the things we do come at a certain cost. And this is global competition still, okay? You can have import duties and all kind of trade barriers imposed, but overall there's still global competition on these materials. And so the cost at which it comes, our customers don't pay a green premium because of the sustainability requirements that we implement, the due diligence we do, the carbon footprint we reduce. This comes at a cost to the company. It's not something that the customers pay for. So overall, this is somewhere, that's another discussion, but this is an important element that needs to be addressed as well. But for the rest, I talked about the robustness of partnerships by building partnerships with others, the global aspects of that, and the ESG sustainability requirements that must be implemented, and that will definitely make a difference.
Thank you. Jin-Dong?
Yes, my simple answer is that we cannot afford to leave it to the market only. So the government have to make measures that can help the-risk projects and make investments more attractive and even profitable. So the examples of such measures include conducive regulations while keeping in mind high ESG standards and promoting public-private partnerships, and then the long-term offtake agreements to ensure that there should be demands for the enterprises. So the thing is, we have to change the behavior of the businesses, and we have to provide the right conditions. That is going to be the job of the government.
Okay, thank you. So we have less than 30 seconds left, but I think we can take maybe one question from the floor, if anyone has any questions. If not, then we'll conclude our discussion. Thank you so much, everyone, for having us here. Thank you.